Good evening, everyone. Sorry. So here we are once again for our regular English meeting, our meeting in English that happens every second Monday of the month. And tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about the book Our Daily Bread, which is our inspirational message it usually comes from. And then after that, we're going to talk about the gospel according to Spiritism, as we usually do on these meetings. And we are usually do our initial prayer in English, and then we move on to our the message, and then after the reading and a little discussion about the message, we go to our main topic of the night. So as we start, let's do our prayer. If you want, you can close your eyes so that we can be more focused on the words and on the feelings by saying this: Dear God, Creator of the universe and of our yet very small hearts, here we are once again under your blessings, surrounded by the good spirits that care for us, care for this Spiritist Center. And we'd like to thank you for all these opportunities that we've been given, not only to be here tonight, but also to be alive, to be able to enjoy the life you gave to us, so that we could learn, that we could grow, that we could become better people, not only for the ones that we love, not only for ourselves, but so that by knowing that we are your children, that we may become builders of this world, just like you are the builder of it all. May these blessings that we feel every day and every second fill our hearts and our minds, so that we have the strength and the courage to face the problems and be happy. Be happy to be able to fight and to keep on going, because in you we trust and we put our lives always in your hands. May you bless us, and may we feel your blessings not only today but forever. So be it. So, let me just go there to the computer to change something, and I'll be back to read a message from this book, Our Daily Bread, and then make a brief comment. Okay, like I was saying before, we're going to read a brief message from this book, Our Daily Bread, which is a book that was written by the Spirit Emmanuel and psychographed by the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier, as we usually call him Chico Xavier. And the message for tonight is the message number 114. It's called The New Athenians. And by Athenians, just to clarify, Athenians are the people who were born in Athens, which is the capital of Greece. So they are called Athenians. And Paul, at that time, because this is a passage from the Acts of the Apostles, Paul was in one of his trips around the world to talk about the message of the Christ, and he was in Athens at that time, and he was talking to some people. And as we know, he was a man that had his parents were Jews, so he was Jews in the family side. He was Greek because he was born in an area of Greece, but also he was Roman because he was educated in the Roman society, and when he was born, he was under Roman rulership. So he was a man that knew about culture and knew about a lot of things that were going on at the time. So he was in Athens and he was talking to the people of Athens. And Athens was this place where philosophy was among one of the main worries or the main concerns of the whole population. People wanted to know about things. People wanted to know about life. People wanted to discuss about what things are. And remember that Socrates, Plato, and some of the great philosophers, most of them, or a lot of them, came from Greece. So Greece was always full of this idea of philosophy, of this love of knowledge. But what we will understand and what we will see, and when we are reading the Acts of the Apostles, from which the passage that we're talking about tonight comes from the Bible, the writer of the passage, which is Luke, he says that most of them, and Emmanuel makes this point here in the message too, that most of them really only what they really wanted was just to stay there and be talking and talking and talking and not doing anything specifically. They just wanted to talk. They just wanted to spend their days doing that. So that being said, it is important for us to understand this so that we can get even more of what Emmanuel says here in the message. But I'm going to read the verse that Emmanuel makes a comment on. So once again, this is in the book Acts of the Apostles from the Bible, chapter number 17, verse number 32. And Paul, or Luke, writes, "But when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, 'We will hear you again regarding this matter.'" So, when all these things are happening, Paul is talking about some stuff about life. And then he says, and he mentions Jesus. And then he says that Jesus resurrected from the dead. And then that's when this thing happens at the end of that speech, after some questions. The writer says, "Then when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them scoffed." To scoff at someone is like to dismiss someone, to say, "Oh, this guy is crazy. What is he talking about? This is nonsense," and just dismiss everybody. Dismiss what the guy is talking. But then he says, and he continues, "But other people," not all of them scoffed, some of them scoffed her. So others said, "We will hear you again regarding this matter." So other people said, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to hear about it. I want to hear about it later on." So now Emmanuel makes the following comment. Paul's contact with the Athenians on the Areopagus, which is the place where he was talking, represent a very interesting lesson for new disciples, which is us. It represents a very interesting lesson for us, the new disciples. As long as the apostle was commenting on his impressions of the famous city, perhaps stoking his listeners' vanity by referring to their sanctuaries and subtly playing upon their reasoning, and they listened attentively. So, like I was saying, Paul was um, talking to those guys, to the people around there, about stuff that they really liked to hear. So they were very attentive, they were like paying attention right there. But once, and then he continues, it is possible that they would have praised him fervently if he had stuck to his initial philosophical viewpoint. Athens would have revered him as a wise man, presenting him to the world in the special mode of its unforgettable figures. So Emmanuel says, if Paul, instead of stop talking about the things that they want to hear, went on talking to, if he had not stopped, probably what would have happened was the people of Athens would have looked at him and say, hey, you are a great man, you are a wise man, you're such a wonderful person, let's hear more about what you're trying to say, let's hear more about your philosophy or about what you want to say. And then Emmanuel continues. Paul, however, so instead of doing this, instead of continuing talking about the things that they want to hear, Paul, however, went on to refer to the resurrection of the dead, giving them a glimpse of the glorious continuation of life beyond the trifles of earth. So Paul stopped talking about the day-to-day life, and he mentioned that life continues after death. And then right at that moment, he says, and from that moment on, the audience, the people that was listening to him, started to feel uncomfortable and scoffed at his loving and sincere words. In the end, they left him practically alone. So when he was almost done speaking and saying something, he was left probably almost alone because they didn't want to hear about it anymore. As soon as he started talking about the resurrection of the dead, meaning that life goes on after life. After we die, we don't die. We continue on. So Emmanuel finishes by saying, this example fits in perfectly with what happens nowadays, today. Within the various areas of modern culture, numerous workers for Christ are listened to and attentively, read it again. Numerous workers for Christ are listened to attentively and are respected by the authorities on the subjects of their specialty. But when they openly declare their belief in a life beyond the physical body, as they affirm the law of responsibility beyond the grave, they immediately receive scoffing laughter from the admirers of a minute before, who leave them at once with the impression of a veritable desert. Emmanuel then goes and finishes by saying, this, what happened to Paul, is similar to what happens today in some sense and in a lot of places. If, say, I am a lawyer, if I am a judge, if I am a mathematician, if I am a scientist, if I am a philosopher, it doesn't matter. And I'm talking to someone about the thing that I know of, if I'm a doctor, they respect me for what I am, for what I know, and for what I'm saying. But as soon as I start mentioning that I believe in life after death, but not only that I believe in life after death, and that leads me to be a more responsible person, because what I do here affects my life after death. Like Emmanuel says, people start losing interest, people start like moving away from us, people start like going away and saying, oh, whatever, and then they leave us alone in our beliefs, giving one with the impression of a desert. That's what Paul felt at the time. So what is the teaching here? I mean, what does Emmanuel want us to understand here? First of all, is I think for us to not do the same thing to anybody. That's one of the first things. If a person is talking about something that he or she believes in, not that I'm going to believe or know or want to know more about it or necessarily agree completely with the other person, but one of the first things is to respect their opinion. If I want people to respect the way we believe, we need to learn how to respect what other people believe. And the bigger example, though, on our side is to become or to use Paul as an example to our own lives. He didn't give up on speaking about what he believed because other people scoffed at him. He didn't stop preaching. He didn't stop going out to different places to talk about Jesus's doctrine or Jesus's teachings just because in some places he was not well received. He kept on going. Although it was like he finishes here, Emmanuel finishes here, although it looks like a desert, because as soon as he started talking and saying that, a lot of people left and left him there talking to almost no one, but he didn't give up, and he kept on doing and going and looking for those who wanted to hear. So that's one of the messages, or that the one that I like to take for myself is, if we truly believe in what we live in, and we have the opportunity or the capability or the ability of living that message and saying and talking about that message, that should be our duty. And do not become new Athenians in the sense that, okay, as soon as something weird comes out, I just move on and leave the person talking alone, talking to herself. No, it's something that we should be able to, or should strive to do better and do differently, to not become these new Athenians. So this message is, again, message number 114 of this book, Our Daily Bread, and that's the one we just read and made a brief comment. And now I'm gonna go to the computer again to change something there, and when I come back, we're gonna talk about start talking tonight about chapter number 7 on the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is entitled "Blessed are the Poor in Spirit." So just 1 second as I go there and come back quickly. Okay, and here I am back again. So as I was saying, and we in the beginning, we do this meeting every second Monday of the month. So in a year, we have 12 meetings in English, and in these meetings, we are going in sequence following the items or the main items in the Gospel according to Spiritism. So maybe 2-3 years ago, we started with before chapter 1 with the introduction, the preface, and so on. And now we are already entering chapter number 7. And today or tonight, we're going to talk about in chapter number 7, like I said, items 1 and 2, and blessed are the poor in spirit, which is the title. And what is interesting about this item is that usually when we have that, when we hear the word poor, right, we tend to well, not we tend to. Poor is something there. It's something lacking. There's something missing at that house or at that thing. So it's like, oh, I have a poor coffee. It means that the coffee is not as good. Or oh, that's a poor house. Oh, so the house lacks a lot of things. And so what does it mean to be poor in spirit? And that's the main thing, because that was an expression that was translated from what Jesus said to our words, to our language, and be it in Portuguese, French, English, they basically, all of them, they use the same kind of idea in poor of spirit. And it maybe it's just in Portuguese, but I doubt it, because I heard a few things, people talking about it in English as well, and it has the same kind of idea. Is that when you hear this expression "poor in spirit," you think that the person is lacking that spirit, because spirit, in that sense, which is said here, has that idea of oh, you're spirited. Let's say you were full of spirit, you're full of life, or you're full of something good. And then when you say that you're poor in spirit, what are you really saying? What is Jesus really trying to say when you say that blessed are those who are poor in spirit? And that's what Kardec decides to start this chapter with, is what does it mean? What should be understood by the words poor in spirit? Because it apparently, even today, I had some conversations with some people, and we were talking about generic things, and then we would in religion, and we would say or hear this word, oh, blessed are the poor in spirit, and the person would say, but why poor in spirit? So it is an expression that still causes some confusion. It still causes that uncertainty about it. So it's almost as if we should by now be able to either one of two things: either understand it or replace the word for something else. You know, like when we say, what can I say? I don't know if you guys know the word in English. It's called cupboard. So cupboard in English is a cabinet. You know those cabinets in the kitchen? But usually those, some of those are like tall, like go from floor to up, not just the ones that are, yeah, like a pantry, maybe. So that's a cupboard. But that's an old word. Almost nobody knows this word anymore. Nobody uses it. You know, if you've lived in a house with an older mom or older dad, right? If say if it's my person of my age, their mother would have said it. So a person of 40 more or less years old know the word. But us that come from the outside, we don't know the word because it's not used regularly on a day-to-day basis. If you go to buy something, you're probably only if you get like an older person selling, they will mention a cupboard. If not, they will say a pantry, or they'll say a cabinet, or they'll say whatever name. So this word was replaced by another one. Poor in spirit probably should be one of these things that should probably be replaced, because we kind of have a hard time getting our minds around it to understand why it is. And I'm saying this, not that I want to change the word, but just to make us understand and feel that when we hear that expression is not as direct as an expression, just like a regular expression. Imagine if a person um, comes to us and says, "Oh, it's I don't know, it's," and we don't know the expression. For example, "Oh, it's pouring outside." And if the person doesn't know what we're talking about, the person will say, "What is it pouring?" I'd say, "Oh, when we say that expression, we're talking about rain." Say, "Oh, so it's pouring water." Yeah. But we can say, it's pouring outside. What is pouring outside? Oh, that dumpster is pouring the trash. So expressions, they have their own lives, I should say, or I could say. They have their own lives. And if we don't know what we're talking about, if we hear the words and the words don't make sense to us, we need to try to understand why it doesn't make sense and go after an understanding of what it is. So I like to joke, when we are coming from one language to another language, that we have to learn how to translate or adapt or interpret expressions from one language to the other, because we cannot translate the words to the other language. If we translate the words in an expression, it doesn't make any sense, or it can make no sense in another language. So I say, "Oh, I'm going to use the big ear to call my mom." There's no sense in it, right? But if I say it in Portuguese, vou usar orelhão para ligar para minha mãe. Orelhão is big ear, right? It makes no sense in English. Makes no sense at all. But in Portuguese, everybody knows what an orelhão is. So it's the same kind of thing. Poor in spirit, it has has its own meaning, which is not connected to the words themselves, or not necessarily connected to the words that were translated into English or into Portuguese or into French. And that's why it is hard for us to hear and make sense of it. Because if I say, "Oh, this guy is poor in judgment," what am I saying? I'm saying that the judgment that guy or that person or that girl does is not the best judgment at all. It's poor. It's like it lacks something. But when I say, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," so is Jesus saying that the people that has less spirit, that has a weak spirit, are blessed? What does that mean? Right? So that's why Kardec gets this word or this expression and say, let's get to it first. Let's try to understand what it is, and then we can move on. So he will end up giving us this. He ends up giving us this idea of what's behind this expression, "poor in spirit." And maybe when he finishes and when we finish, we will be able to to replace this, at least in our minds, to replace this expression with something that makes more sense to us. So it is interesting when we are reading a text like this, and we have to have in mind that when we are reading something, we have to remember when that thing was written, because that tells us a lot of things. So, for example, this week, or a week ago, a little bit more than a week ago, November started. Today is the 11th, right? 2019. 1982, Tiago was not even born. He was not even being thought of yet. 1982, there was a movie that was launched called Blade Runner. Blade Runner was not a very successful movie when it was on theaters. Nobody really liked it a lot. The director was not happy with it because the company that was producing it decided to change a few things, change the ending, change some stuff in the middle, so it made the movie like more appeal to a wider audience, but that's not what the director wanted. So many years later, he finally was able to put the ending that he wanted, but he was only able to do that because in the years after that movie was out, lots of people started to pay more attention to that movie and to what the movie said and to what we had in the movie. So it's a dark science fiction movie, like in 1982, set in the future. Do you know when the future of the movie was? November 2019. We are in that future. We just entered that future, and thankfully we are not as dark as he imagined there. But it is funny to think about it, because I mean, I love that movie. I was very young. I didn't watch it when it was launched, but I watched quite a few times after that, and I love that movie. I love the soundtrack. I love the story. I love a lot of stuff about that movie. But it is very interesting to, when we look and we watch the movie, to pay attention to a lot of ideas that they put into that movie of what they thought the future would be. When we look at from now, right, we have to look at as a movie that was made in the 80s, more than 30 years ago. So what is in there, although they are referring to the future, it's not the future. It's what they think the future would be. So we have to be aware that what they are saying is a product of their time. It's not a product of our time now. It's a product of their time. So when Kardec is writing here, we have to remember that he is writing from his perspective in 1860. So it is interesting when we go into these texts with that mindset, trying to not to know exactly what he was thinking, but to try to get clues of what things were happening at the time. Because he says it. And this one is very clear. So I'm making all this comment, but this one is very clear because that's how he starts. He says, skeptics, meaning people who don't believe, skeptics have mocked this maxim, as they have mocked many other things they do not understand. So they were making fun of this expression, of this, not only the expression poor in spirit, but the full saying of Jesus, which is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So they were mocking this. They say, why is the kingdom of heaven for the people who are poor in spirit? What about the rich in spirit? So and they were mocking. So I find that to be very interesting, because Kardec, what he is trying to say here, and imagining him at the time, that he was probably studying to write this, probably studying to understand this, studying what the spirits were saying in the spirits book, studying other books and reading other books, paying attention to lectures about the topic, and putting all this information together to write something here. He was probably finding a lot of people talking nonsense or ridiculing this specific passage. And so he writes it here. So we have him here. And that's what one of the things that I find interesting, or very interesting about art, or about what we do, is that we leave our marks there. It doesn't matter what it is, just like the movie. Like, there's the mark of the director there, and not only of the director, of some other stuff, other people there too. But in the book here, we can see Kardec thinking with the people of his time. Thinking, not just trying to write for, whatever, the biggest audience, or no. He is worried about what people are going to read it and try to understand something. So he relates to the life to life that he lives. He doesn't just like comes with something out of the blue and talks him. No. See, I read some papers, I heard some people talking about this, and now I'm seeing that there's a lot of skeptics that mock this saying of Jesus. They don't understand what they're talking about. And I'm going to show it to you why they mock, but they lack like the interest of going deeper and trying to really understand what it is. And that's basically what Kardec is trying to do here, and he will do it here. So he says it right after, by poor in spirit, and then that's when he first explains it. Jesus did not mean those devoid of intelligence, those who do not have intelligence, those who are dumb. That's not what Jesus wanted to mean. He meant the humble. So the poor in spirit means humble. Or maybe to be more clear, as we usually hear much more the word pride or proud than the word humble. So it's the one who is not proud, who does not have pride, overwhelming pride or huge pride of what he is or he has. So I'm going to read it in full, so it makes more sense than to be stopping like I'm doing. By the poor in spirit, Jesus did not mean those devoid of intelligence, but the humble, inasmuch as he said that the kingdom of heaven would be for them and not for the prideful, for the ones who are full of pride, who think of themselves as the top of the top of the top. Like the French said, la crème de la crème. Like the Brazilians say, a última Coca-Cola do deserto. The last Coke of the desert. So it's not for those. That's what That's what Jesus is not saying. Jesus is not saying that it's for the people who are dumb or have no idea, no minds, or no. He is saying that the poor in spirit are those who are humble and not prideful. So if we could, and that's how Kardec starts, if we could replace the words poor in spirit for another expression, it would be, blessed are the humble, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So that's how Kardec starts. And The rest of the text, which, as I usually do, I highly recommend reading it. It's not a very long text. It is a very interesting text. It has much more than I'm gonna be able to say here, but it is something that clears up some of our minds or our hearts. I have a friend in works that I work with her, and she says something very interesting. She says that for those who boast, to boast is to, like, say that they're the best or they always get it right. There is always the fall. There is always the fall. And that's mainly what we think of this idea that Jesus is trying to convey to us. Is for us, and I will go one step further than what is said here, because it's not said here. To be humble is not usually what we think is to be humble. When I say that I know something, depending on how I say it, I may be humble or I may be prideful. It depends on how I say it. It doesn't depend on what I say. It depends on how I say. If I come to a meeting and I read this thing this week, which made me like kind of cringe in myself. There was this researcher. She is a doctor. I think she is a doctor. She says she was giving this lecture on something that I can't remember exactly what it was, but it doesn't matter, because the idea here is really what counts. She was giving this lecture to a group of doctors, PhDs, and people that know about it. So she is talking and mentioning that the main topic, I think it was about a disease that she had a research on, and the method of treatment or something like that. So she starts talking and talking and talking, and then comes this man, raises his hand, and interrupts her and says, "Oh, on that topic that you're talking about, you should read this paper and this research that was published." As if he was trying to say that he knew about what she was talking about, and he wanted to give her an input and give her more of what she was talking about. And then she looks at him and says, "Oh, you mean this paper?" And then gives the full name of the paper. And he says, "Yes." He said, "Oh yeah, I know this paper. I wrote it." So the guy, it is such a, to me, it is such a, I mean, she is there giving the lecture, right? She is teaching, she is showing something, right? And it comes this guy that can't wait for her to finish, interrupts her, tells her that she needs to read this thing, that he thinks it is great. And of course, he thinks that he knows more, apparently, because why would he interrupt? And then in the end, she says, "Oh, I wrote this paper." So she is saying that she knows it. She is saying that she knows, she has the knowledge. She is saying that she wrote the paper. But in this thing, apparently to me at least, it looks much more that she is the one being humble and he is the one being prideful in that situation. Because she could have said right in the beginning, I am this, or I am that, or I am this, or I am that. And that's not how she reacted. But he, on the other hand, just as if he doesn't know how to hold himself, because hopefully it's not because it was a woman, but unfortunately, most of the times it is because it's a woman that's speaking, and we men usually tend to think that women know less than what we do, which is terrible. And there's even an expression in English for this. It's called mansplaining. So a man interrupting a woman to let her know that she doesn't know something, it's mansplaining. It is such a common thing that there is even a word for it. So that's what he was doing. So it's not about what we say, but how we say it. So being humble is not about saying that I am or saying that I am not, but it's how I say it. If I'm a PhD of whatever, and I am at the specific place that requires some kind of presentation, and I say that I'm a PhD, I'm not being prideful. I'm just stating what I am. I studied my whole life to be a PhD. Why shouldn't I say it when opportunity comes? But imagine every place you go, you're going to buy a coffee and then you say, hey, I'm a PhD. What? You see the difference? That's when we start. I mean, I'm making the ridicule situation so that we can understand. Because being humble, it's not about, oh, I'm this poor guy, or no, it's not. Because I can be very, very prideful by doing that. Oh, I'm not showing it so that people ask me who I am and then I'll say it. That's being prideful. But if I say in a normal thing what I am, what I do, and then that's it, and move on from the conversation, I'm just stating what I am, and then that's it. Just a normal person, a person that doesn't boast what he is, so that, or she is, so that we don't fall. So when Jesus says that the ones that are humble or poor in spirit are the ones that are going to conquer or are going to be, in the kingdom of heaven. But what does he say precisely? Let me just get it back here. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's because once we are humble and we know our place, almost nobody can take us out of that place. Because I am what I am, independently of where I am. And then that's it. I'm like the owner of the situation. But, oh, I am the biggest, and if I don't have this, then if that's taken out, I'm out of that place. Because I'm basing myself on something that I am not, instead of basing myself on something that I'm basing myself on something that I have instead of on something that I am. So I have power. So what if I don't have power? Who I am. Oh, I have money. That's why you're going to... Stephen, in the book Paul and Stephen, he says it at one point to Saul, which didn't become Paul yet. They are talking, and Paul looks at him and says, I'm going to make the Senate or the Sanhedrin force you to deny what you're saying and become a Jew like you should be, something to that sort. And he says, Stephen says, I recognize that the Sanhedrin has the power to make me cry and make me shed lots of tears, but it has no power over who and what I believe in, because that's who I am. But what I have, you can take can take anything and everything out of my hands. Can take even my life out of it. But you cannot take me out of myself. When we understand that, when we get to that point to recognize who we are, which is very tough, very, very tough. Of course, and this is usually in Spiritism we talk a lot about that, but it usually goes through the idea of know yourself, of knowing who I am, of knowing what I want, and pursuing that, and going after that, to try to become the owner of myself. Not disregarding everybody that's surrounding me, no, together, because we need each other. We all need each other. But so the more I am aware of who I am, of what I want, of how I'm gonna do it, and I set my mind and my steps into it, then I can become a better owner of myself. And then when I come to do something with, be it God here in the message or in my life, which doesn't really matter, I'm gonna do it because I believe in it, not because somebody is telling me, because, oh, this and this. My dad used to tell me that that his mother, my grandmother, used to say, do you want to be right all the time, or do you want to be happy? It's not about being right. It's not about making it right all the time. It's about the effort that we make to really know who we are, to reach a point where I can be certain that that thing not only makes me happy in a sense of, okay, this fulfills a little bit of my life, but also it doesn't disturb the lives of everybody around me in a bad way. So being humble is knowing our place, just like the small gears in a watch clock, in a clock. Every single one of them has its own function, and they have different sizes, different weights. They touch each other, but if one breaks, the whole clock breaks. But every single one has its own. And I have to learn that humbleness is to be, once we realize that I am that specific one, I will be that specific one. Until maybe one day, when the clock breaks, for whatever reason, I can be used in something else. I can grow into a bigger one. I can do something bigger, whatever it is. But to be humble is to be aware of that. Is to be, okay, I always wanted to be a doctor. But I tried, and I couldn't be for whatever reason. But I was able to become a nurse. I have to make peace with that. Otherwise, I will be sad. I will be sick. I will be worried for the rest of my life, because I was never able to be a doctor. And now, because I was never able to be a doctor, and this doesn't get out of my mind, I cannot be a good nurse as well. So what am I doing then? That's not being humble. That's not being able to overcome pride. And then if I cannot do that, how can I have the kingdom of God? If I cannot simply do that because I'm not happy where I am. If I'm not happy where I am, the kingdom of God is not going to be able to establish itself inside of me, because it's not something that comes from the outside. It's something that comes from me to the outside. It comes from the inside out and not from the outside in. So being humble, being poor in spirit is recognizing, or one of the things is recognizing who I am and trying to become the best me that I can be at one point, at any time. If I'm going to be a basketball player, a soccer player, a lawyer, an electrician, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is my mind is set on something. Let's do that something. And let's do the best that I can on that something. And when by building that road, by building that track, I am setting up my personal future, setting tracks for other people that are coming behind me. A lot of people that are looking at me and seeing, okay, I can do it, he can do it, I can do it, she can do it, and we can do it. So the kingdom of heaven will be theirs, or ours, of the humble, the day that once we are happy and fulfilled with something that I really was able to understand and to come in peace with, I will be able to say, oh, yes, this is my place. It doesn't matter where I am, because wherever I am in peace with myself. And when I'm in peace with myself, kingdom of heaven just arrived. It is something that's far in the horizon. Yes, it is. It is something that's out there. It's in the horizon. But that's what's beautiful about the horizon, is that it's always there. Makes me want to go after. And the more I walk towards the horizon, the more the horizon walks far away from me, to make me walk more and keep going. Just like knowledge, it doesn't have an end. The more I know, the more I have to know. The more I know, the more stuff I can know. So of course, knowing about ourselves is the same idea. The more I try to know myself, the more I will learn that there's more stuff to learn. So let's not make ourselves like, oh, I am the greatest, I am the biggest. I can be. One day I can be. Let's be the greatest that I've ever been, not the greatest comparing myself to other people, but the greatest comparing myself to myself. Oh, I am better today than I was a few years ago. Hopefully, a few years from now, I will be better than I am right now. And keep going, keep progressing, right? And understanding that one day I will be happier, and hopefully I will be happier with people that I love together by my side, because that's one of the things that I think we always look forward to, is to be together with people we love, with people we care, so that we can all share a better life. So this is part of what the message is. Like I said in the middle, if you want to read these two items, chapter 7, items 1 and 2 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, what should be understood by the words poor in spirit, based on the verse number 3 on chapter 5 of the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus says to the people that are listening to him, blessed are the humble, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And may we all have a great night. May we learn with Jesus, with the good spirits, and with the good readings we've been doing to learn more and more to be more and more humble. Thank you, everybody for being here, for sticking here to us. And right now, after we have the passes, which is not mandatory, but if you want to, Chris is there, Nancy is there to give the passes. So we'll come back to say our final prayer and finish our meeting. And thank you once again. Have a great night.